And welcome to Now More Questions, the interview series on European affairs that gets conversations started. In July 2023, the European Commission published its strategy on Web 4.0 and virtual worlds, a head start in the next technological transition. And just like what happened with the internet, the strategy identifies a lot of potential, a lot of pitfalls, many opportunities, but also many threats. A bit like with social media, which emerged initially as an opportunity for staying in touch with friends and family, but morphed into a gigantic data gathering operation serving the interests of targeted advertising. We are now faced with a situation in which virtual worlds, which emerged initially as a new frontier for gaming and entertainment, is increasingly becoming referenced as a solution in areas such as healthcare or education. In parallel, we see that the digitalization of our societies is opening a new front line when it comes to social policy, liberal democracy, individual freedom, and democratic accountability. What used to be fought out in the ballot box and on the streets, if necessary, is now also increasingly being fought online on privatized digital infrastructure. So what are our future prospects when it comes to the emergence of virtual worlds? Will virtual worlds be built differently to the internet? Will new players emerge to offer digital infrastructure for virtual worlds that haven't yet emerged today through the internet? Well, to discuss this, I am joined by Mel Slater, the coordinator of the European Metaverse Research Network, a network including 8 leading research institutions from 7 European countries. The network was launched in May 2023 with the aim of carrying out interdisciplinary research on the technology, potential benefits, and risks of the metaverse idea. So I don't know anyone else better prepared to answer some questions on virtual worlds. Mel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So in the tradition of Now More Questions, Mel, we offer the first question to the previous speaker on the show. That was Julie Hollis. She is the Secretary General of Eurogeo Surveys, and she was interviewed on the topic of critical raw materials.
There's a lot of work going on in the field of digital twins, for example, digital twins of Europe, particularly as a means to handle climate change adaptation and mitigation. What do you see that virtual worlds can offer to these efforts?
Digital twins, where we simulate aspects of reality in order to understand what may happen better. A possible advantage of immersive systems, virtual worlds, is that rather than just looking at something on the screen, we can be there and experience it. So, for example, with respect to climate change, we're actually involved in a project called Environmental, which is concerned with the effect of climate change on mental health. And what we're doing in that consortium, which mainly consists of neuroscientists of various shades, what we're doing is actually simulating the process of some aspects of climate change in virtual reality and in real time, looking at the possible effects on people. So in general, digital twins, kind of in an abstract sense, in terms of simulations, are very, very useful. But where it's feasible and where it's itself concerned with situations where immersion may be useful, this immersion adds another layer where people can actually experience something rather than just read about it or watch it on a video. So it gives experience, basically.
Yeah, and compared to some of the tools that we have, for instance, modeling, it's a sort of a next step where beyond the model, you can then simulate what the model might be able to represent. So I think we can clearly see this notion of simulation and experience. Before we go a bit further into some of the case studies, let's say, that we could imagine out of virtual worlds, I'd just like to get your sense on where do you see the actual development of virtual worlds in the broader digitalization of things, right? So do you see it as an evolution of the internet, let's say, a kind of a next step of the internet, or do you see it as something quite radically different from the internet?
Yeah, so actually, first I'd like to put something right in what you said in your introduction. Virtual worlds, it didn't start with gaming. I mean, I've been involved in it since the early 1990s, and it actually started in places like NASA and other similar labs in order for virtual reality to provide ways of people experiencing things that are impossible in reality in a safe way, and so on. For example, how is it going to be like to be in a space station, experiencing that in virtual reality before people ever experience it in reality? So gaming is something that came much, much later in the last 5 to 10 years, when virtual reality systems have been more available to consumers, more available in the home, which was just impossible. Even 10 years ago, it was impossible. For example, a system 10 years ago may cost 50,000 euros, and now it costs like 400 or 500 euros. So back to your question, I think there's a natural development of humans to go beyond our body. So, unlike probably any other animal, as far as I know. So, first of all, action at a distance. We learned to throw stones, and then this became eventually to shoot rockets up to the moon. We learned to communicate at a distance. First of all, maybe with drums or fires or something like that, and now what we're doing right now. So, in a way, immersive virtual worlds where you're there with other people simultaneously in the same shared environments are, on the one hand, a natural extension of this striving to go beyond our bodies and to go beyond our current place, to be able to meet with people, even change our bodies, change the way we appear very dramatically, have completely different experiences along with other people. On the one hand, they're a natural extension of what's been happening over the centuries, but on the other, they're quite different because of the immersive nature. So as I was saying before, it's really different, me talking to you on a screen, than if we're in the same room. And it's being in the same room, this immersive quality, which the immersive worlds will make possible. So yes, it's a continuation, but no, it has this extra new dimension, which is the immersive nature of it.
And how does it connect with something else that's being talked about a lot these days, with artificial intelligence, which is this sort of computer capacity, right? That would be given to humans, but very much in a way not in control by humans to some extent, let's say. How do virtual worlds interact with developments in artificial intelligence? I mean, are there things that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, there's actually two aspects. One is so where do virtual worlds come from? They don't just pop out of nowhere. People have to create them, and that involves a lot of computer programming and other issues. And artificial intelligence can very much help in speeding up the production line, because it's actually quite good at programming. So instead of like a human spending a day trying to program something complex, provided that human already knows how to program, it can ask artificial intelligence systems like ChatGPT to write a program. Then if the human, him or herself, knows how to program, they can check through it, and it may have saved hours and hours of work. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, what's going to happen inside virtual worlds? So, of course, we're going to be speaking with other real people and interacting with them, but maybe there'll also be virtual human entities, or not necessarily even human, with whom we interact to carry out various tasks, like going shopping in the virtual world. I would like to buy a particular new brand of something, it doesn't matter what. Where is the best place I can find this? And the artificial intelligence can not only tell you, but demonstrate it to you there in real time, fabricate it, show you what it's like, and give you an immersive experience of what it would be like to use that item. So I imagine that virtual worlds will be populated by humans, but also by artificial intelligence entities that will act as guides and helping helping hand, and so on. Of course, on the other hand, maybe we'll talk about this later, there are dangers to that, because I don't know if it's true today that we're not in control of artificial intelligence. I think we more or less are today. But in the future, who knows if an artificial intelligence can ever form its own goals and intentions, and very quickly to learn to know us better than we know ourselves, to quote Yuval Harari. And if it gets to know us better than we know ourselves, then it can manipulate us into doing things that it wants rather than we want. I don't see that today, because I don't think artificial intelligence has its own intentions, but who knows what may happen in the future.
Yeah, it's this constant interaction between humans and computers, let's say, that will be one of the defining features of our digital life. And as you speak of the case study, let's say, of shopping, and there are many others that we see in healthcare, education, as I mentioned in the intro, but there are many others. But let's just take shopping, as you mentioned it, right? So what you're imagining is a scenario where instead of just being on an online browser and putting things in a basket, we would be effectively in a shop with a salesman, let's say, that could be an artificial intelligence, presenting us with different options, and we would be literally then putting that item in a basket. But nevertheless, there would still be a checkout point, in the sense that you are imagining still that it would come back to real life. So there would be a sale, and that item would somehow then be delivered in real life. Am I correct in that thinking, or are you imagining a world where this shopping experience completely happens in the virtual world, and that would actually somehow satisfy the human need without actually having the item delivered at his or her home? Do I make myself clear with my question?
Yes, it's actually both of those, because first of all, this idea of the metaverse or virtual worlds, they're not just entirely virtual, and they're not physical, but they're an interplay between the virtual and the physical. So one may be obtaining something purely for use in the virtual world, or one may be I don't know, buying a new kitchen sink for your real home. And the new kitchen sink for your real home, the artificial intelligence, you've talked to it, you've explained what you want, you've told it the sizes of your real kitchen, and it not only maybe you've shown it a photograph, and from that photograph it constructs in the virtual reality a model of your kitchen, puts the new sink in, and you try, you find out what it's like in an immersive way. So it's both for purchasing items that you only want to use in the virtual world, I don't know, like a new avatar or something, or it may be items that you purchase in the real world.
But so this interaction in the virtual world will require, nevertheless, quite a lot of discernment from humans who are on the receiving end of all of this. So one thing, just to clear something up for me: will the entrance into the virtual world always be based on some kind of a physical headset? I mean, is that the basic way, the basic entrance into virtual worlds, or are there other things out there that exist that I'm not aware of?
Okay, so in my lab, we have an array of head-mounted displays that we've been using over the past like nearly 20 years. And if you saw the ones we used 20 years ago, it's like a joke. How would anyone ever put those on their heads? But we did, and we thought it was amazing at the time. And now, compared with not just the price, but the weight, the size, how it looks and everything, is completely different. So I do imagine a time in the not too distant future where head-mounted displays will be not much different from wearing spectacles, from wearing glasses, on the one hand. On the other, again, back in the 1990s, it was in Seattle, the University of Washington. They were experimenting with a kind of virtual reality where, it sounds dangerous, but it wasn't, where a laser would draw things directly onto your retina from the outside. So you wore nothing. Of course, you had to be in sight of the laser machine, and it was able to create some simple wire frame, just made of lines, virtual experiences without you wearing anything at all. And the third possibility, which I think is far off in the distant future, is direct brain interfaces. There isn't enough knowledge today to be able to do that, but one can imagine, just like there's been shown in various movies, that one enters virtual worlds through just maybe some small implant that you had when you were born or something like that, that directly manipulates your brain activity. But there I'm thinking more of in a term of maybe a century. But definitely we are even today, in the fairly near distant future, I'm talking a 10-year time span, we are not stuck with these big, heavy, even today they're not very heavy, but these big, obvious head-mounted displays. One could be sitting on a metro opposite someone wearing glasses, and you don't know, are they here or are they in their own virtual world?
Yeah, because I mean, we spend quite a lot of time through education trying to apprehend the real world. I'm not sure we're always very successful, but we try. And here you're talking about a world that will also require a lot of discernment, a certain number of skills to be able to apprehend it. And especially in the context where maybe the physical infrastructure to enter the virtual world will be even less obvious. It might be even harder to know when you've moved into the virtual world from the real world, let's say. So we've seen some of the use cases that you mentioned around shopping, and we understand that I think in the simulated world of being able to do tests and learning things on site, and we see some opportunities there. I can imagine that. But at the same time, in the research that you're doing, what kind of risks have you identified with all of this? Can you talk us through some of them? Because I think risks are always a little bit more interesting than opportunities in a way.
Yeah, so I mean, before I say that, I'd like to emphasize that the vast use of immersive systems are positive, like for remote medical consultations, for education, for doing experiments that are dangerous, but nevertheless doing them virtually, and so on and so on, remote meetings and things like that. But of course, with all these things, like with any technology, there are risks associated. So, for example, one of the risks that I see is that when you're in a virtual world, you're wearing some device which is tracking many aspects of what you're doing, where your eyes are looking, what you're paying attention to, how your facial expression is, how your body is moving, how your heart is beating. That's trivial to do today. How your skin is sweating, and also it's even possible, though, with more clumsy devices, let's say, to be recording brain activity for positive reasons, maybe because some medical application, or simply for fun, because I just think about something and it happens. So there's a huge amount of tracking data going on. So if there's that huge amount of tracking data, potentially, if that data is stored somewhere and made available to external sources, they can build a very good model of you individually and of the mass of people, of how people respond to particular influences, particular events and situations. And if they can do that, then they can model you. And there it comes back to modeling you for the purposes of advertising, or even more dangerous, for political persuasion, surreptitious political persuasion. So that's one of the dangers I see, that data which is collected during the process of being in and acting in virtual worlds must always remain under total control of the people who generate it. Of the consumer, of the participant who generates it. This is one thing. Other things are that, for example, we've shown in our work over many years, replicated many times, that it's possible to use virtual reality to reduce racial bias, for example, of white people against black people. The question is, can that same technology be used to increase racial bias of white people against black people? So it's possible to, for almost anything positive, it's possible to use the same technology to, in a sense, do its opposite. So the question is then, how is all this going to be regulated? because virtual worlds, although they've been going around, I would say 50 years, virtual worlds have existed in one form or another. I would say the whole question of regulation hasn't really been tackled yet, and it's something just like AI really needs to be looked at by the policy making authorities, together with the scientists and technicians and investigators who are looking into this. So yes, there are extremely fascinating and positively beneficial applications, but for every one of those, there's its negative dark side.
Yeah, and to come back then to this question of governance, which I think is correct. I mean, it's always the question of the use. There is a use that is, let's say, promoted top down. There's also a use that is coming from the bottom up as well, and I think we have to consider both. One key aspect of this, in my mind, is the actual who is providing the infrastructure. Because if you have very few corporate players managing essentially the infrastructure, the access to, in this case, the virtual worlds, but it's similar with artificial intelligence and indeed with the internet. You are concentrating power in very few hands. Now, the promise on the other side is that these tools are offering a decentralized approach where actually the power is in the hands of the users to some extent. But we're seeing that it's not quite that simple. I mean, that sort of simple story that was told to say, the internet is bringing this decentralized, pluralized freedom for societies, individual freedom is actually not that clear. And there was a lot of manipulation of that. In the end, we find out that there's actually a lot of power in very few hands, very few corporate players' hands. So in the case of the virtual worlds, how do you see this tension between what is very much centralized versus how users are able to actually decentralize that power in the actual operations of the platform? Is this going to be a key of the regulatory development in virtual worlds?
Yes, I think it's quite possible for, even though the platforms may be made by relatively few players, how those platforms are used and how they're regulated doesn't depend only at all, actually, even at all on those players. So if we think of something like Twitter-like systems, yeah, they're made by a particular company, and that company, of course, to survive, they want to make money. But how they're used depends partly on the users and partly on the regulatory control imposed on the users. So one can imagine a type of Twitter where there is no harassment, where there is no political manipulation, where there is no death threats, and so on and so on. But unfortunately, it's not like that today. But it could be. There's actually absolutely nothing to stop it from being in the hands of the users. If the people who control those platforms and access to those platforms and what's allowed on those platforms are themselves properly controlled by a democratic society. So I think it depends on the will of the legitimate policymakers, let's say, to make sure that these systems, of course, yeah, they have to make money to survive, so there has to be advertising, but to make sure that everything is within the bounds of people able to enjoy peaceful, enjoyable, happy experiences. Maybe some experiences can be more frightening because people want that. They want to engage in some activity which stimulates them in some way. That's fine, but really avoiding harassment and so on. Yeah,
But so
it's possible.
But so then this comes to another aspect of what you said when you talked about the risk of being able to from data gathering, the risk of being able to anticipate individual decisions, collective decisions, maybe manipulate political decisions, political outcomes actually in the end through virtual worlds. And this then talks about the interaction between virtual worlds and the public space. And this is something quite different in a way, because it's this link between actual effective democratic decision making. So it's not just a question of virtual worlds, it's actually the question of the impact of virtual worlds on real political life, let's say. And again, one can imagine it to be quite interesting to make, simulated experiments of all sorts of decisions and look at what kind of outcomes that might lead to, potentially without any harm done to anyone. But so is this something that you're working on, the link between public decision making and virtual worlds within democracies? Because here, I think if that is the case, I have a feeling that there's not enough of that being discussed democratically, if I may say. I mean, it seems to be something of quite a closed door type of discussion. And yet the impacts and the effects will be huge. And the need for discernment would be even greater, because, I mean, at the end of the day, democracy is based on, rational critical thinking, right? So if we don't have the tools to apprehend rational critical thinking in the virtual world, and that has an effect on democracy, then that is indeed quite worrying. So what is happening in terms of virtual worlds and its manipulation, if I may say, of public space?
Yes. So just to emphasize what you said, if we think about it, let's think about sorry to be a bit political, but like the Brexit referendum. So it's been argued that just based on clicks, likes, that's it, they were able to manipulate as parts of the population into certain ways of thinking about the Brexit situation. That's just looking at videos, images, and text and doing a click. And from that data, certain powerful organizations were able to manipulate according to some theories. Now, add to this the whole context of immersion, where you're not just looking at videos and text and so on, but you're actually in the situations. It's like an order of magnitude greater. So there is a very, very big risk. I agree. Now, I'm not myself working on that aspect of democracy. We are working on other things to do with that ethics. But in the European Metaverse Research Network, which you mentioned earlier, there is a group devoted to that. And they'll be carrying out studies and carrying out, let's say, policy making sessions in order to bring this issue to the fore and to make our worries and concerns available to policymakers in the European Union. So it's a very important issue. I agree, because, I know from my own work how powerful immersion is as a way to not only give people experiences that they can't experience any other way in reality, but as a way that people could be potentially manipulated far more powerfully than they could be just from likes and clicks and so on 2D interfaces. So it's a very important issue.
Yeah, and to come back to this question of control, we see then that would also connect potentially with a lot of behavioral psychology, that we see governments getting more and more invested in behavioral psychology, which is also to some extent quite worrying in the way governments are accompanying, let's say, behavior change, in theory for positive outcomes, but
yeah,
maybe not always.
Nudge theory. Yeah.
Nudge theory, yes. Okay, now that's I mean, I think you paint a very honest picture, even if I understand that you've been heavily invested in developing virtual worlds. So thanks for that, because you're even hinting to the fact that there might even be limits to virtual worlds. So I think that's quite interesting to hear.
But of course, I want to emphasize the positive aspects. So the positive aspects, to me, far outweigh the negative, but the negative really have to be considered and regulated to some extent.
Now, just maybe a little bit of a trivial question, but I think it does have an importance. You know how organizations have had a string of social media outlets to deal with? More and more you see all these different icons and logos that organizations need to have to communicate, to the outside world. Do you imagine that moving forwards, organizations of any kind will have its own sort of virtual world portal to allow people to interact with them in the virtual world, a little bit like what happens through social media? I mean, is this a sort of a standard way forwards, or will it remain more of a niche thing in the end?
No, I think it will be like you say in the first example that you gave, that organizations. Well, so first of all, let's note that there is no metaverse existing today. There's kind of nascent examples of it, but even in those, some organizations have set up, let's say, their areas, their stand that you can visit and look around and interact and so on. Which goes back to my point about artificial intelligence entities helping people move around particular spaces and understanding what's happening there. So I'm pretty sure that once metaverses actually really begin to grow, the organizations will feel they need to be there and have their stations there and their places that you can visit. And absolutely, I think so. Just like we have our web pages, we'll have our places there in virtual worlds. Yes.
Okay, so the metaverse will be increasingly intertwined with artificial intelligence, and this is something that we need to anticipate, all of us as individuals, as organizations, as societies, and this is something that the European Commission is working on as well. So maybe just to finish off, can you just give us your top priorities at the European Metaverse Research Network? What are the key things that you're working on to inform then policy on this?
Yes. So as I was saying, the metaverse. First of all, there is no metaverse today. There's just some examples of it. And second, there's a lot of talk about the metaverse. There's a lot of speculation, just like we're doing now. But there's no data. There's very little data about there. Yeah, there's lots of like thousands of experiments on virtual reality, on particular aspects of virtual reality, or particular uses of it and applications, and using it to understand human psychology and this kind of thing. But there's very, very little data on the impact of the metaverse, how it will be, how people will use it, what its dangers are, and so on. So the primary goal of the European Metaverse Research Network is to use its interdisciplinary power to actually carry out research that's related to the metaverse, like how it's going to be used for marketing, how democracy should be defended in the metaverse, how education should be carried out or could be carried out. All of these things are being worked on concretely, not just talked about, but with actual building programs that create particular virtual worlds in which people can interact. And then from these studies, using that to inform the policymakers about what we found. So not just publishing in academic journals, which of course we do, because that's the way we inform. One way we inform our colleagues in the scientific world, but also leading to data that we can generate that will inform policymakers about what we found. So a short summary of my answer to your question is data. We generate data, we draw conclusions, and we inform.
It's fascinating to hear you. It almost feels that when I was studying politics and sociology, I had a feeling that democracy was all about political science. I have a feeling that the 21st century democracy is almost more about computer science. Oddly enough, and in a way, it's the computer programming that might define the democracy of the future much more than political scientists. I don't know. We'll have to see. But Mel, thanks a lot for having taken the time to share your thoughts and views with us. It's been really, really enlightening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, that was Mel Slater, coordinator of the European Metaverse Research Network, who gave us some insights on what he sees as the becoming of a new digital era with virtual worlds, providing experiences so immersive that they are capable of producing emotions, empathy, and a level of human and social interaction that has never been seen before outside of the real world. And at the same time, these virtual worlds, these platforms, offer the possibility of having control over individual freedom, over human behavior, over social behavior, collective behavior, and possibly even public policy outcomes. So it is clear that we need to apprehend these tools before these tools apprehend us completely. And although there are some great benefits to virtual worlds that are explicitly being demonstrated in fields such as healthcare, for instance, where one is able to simulate certain environments in order to avoid harm in real life. And that is a great way of doing experiments, potentially. We also need to be aware of some of the risks when it comes to, in particular, individual freedom. Now, I'm not sure what the limits are to virtual worlds today. I see huge potential in linking virtual worlds with artificial intelligence when it comes to space and time exploration. I mean, what better way to explore the universe than through some kind of artificial intelligence out there feeding us information through the virtual world? That would be quite a fantastic way to experience outer space. But when it comes to life on Earth, maybe reality is not so bad. I mean, sometimes it's harsh, and we do want to overcome some harshness of reality. But at the same time, our immersive experience of planet Earth is in reality, and not so much in virtual worlds. I don't know what you think, but I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can link up also with the 2 previous episodes that we had on virtual worlds. We interviewed Laetitia Bochu, who is the president of XR for Europe, and Petra Bertova. She was a campaigner at the Stop 5G campaign, talking about some of the risks related to digitalization in the virtual worlds. And make up your own mind, but please look into these topics. Be aware that virtual worlds are developing fast. And if Mel is right, every organization will have its virtual world portal just like it has its social media outlets. So this is something that we're going to have to get used to. Thank you for watching, and we'll be in touch for our next episode of Now More Questions. Bye-bye.